World War II keep their composure under fire. You will be shocked to learn their methods. Behind the roar of artillery and the crack of rifle fire, there was always another invisible war. This war was not fought for cities or high ground on maps. It was fought inside each soldier, in the silence of his thoughts, where his own fear was his main enemy. We think we know everything about heroism, feats, and self-sacrifice. But we know almost nothing about the quiet, daily battle that millions of people fought just to stay sane under fire. Their weapons in this battle were not grenades, but striking ingenuity, dark humor, and simple human routine. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how ordinary soldierly routine became the most powerful armor against panic, and why the ability to laugh at death was valued no less than the ability to shoot accurately. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of soldier survival, and it has nothing to do with weapons. In a world where chaos was the norm and life could end at any second, the only salvation was a strict, almost religious ritual. Soldiers clung to routine like a drowning man clings to a lifebuoy, because it created the illusion of order and control. Cleaning weapons was not just a technical necessity, but a kind of meditation. Soldiers could spend hours disassembling, cleaning, and oiling their rifles, completely focused on the process. Every screw, every detail, familiar to the touch, brought them back to reality where they were not just targets, but masters controlling their tools. Shaving in the morning with ice-cold water from a helmet was another such ritual. In the muddy conditions of the trenches, it seemed pointless, but it was precisely this absurd adherence to the habits of peacetime that prevented soldiers from completely turning into savages. Smooth skin on the face was a small victory of civilization over the barbarism of war. Eating meals on a strict schedule, even if it was just a can of cold canned food, structured the endless and frightening day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. These simple words served as anchors, keeping the mind from falling into the abyss of fear and uncertainty. They reminded him of home, where life flowed according to understandable and predictable laws. Rewinding foot cloths, darning undershirts, sewing on buttons. These monotonous, almost mechanical actions kept his hands busy and, more importantly, kept his mind busy. They prevented his thoughts from wandering where only panic and despair awaited them. The soldier focused on the simple and understandable, shielding himself from the complex and terrible. Even the process of writing letters home was part of this protective routine. Soldiers carefully wrote letters, choosing their words carefully, describing their daily lives and concealing the horrors. This process connected them to another normal world, reminding them that somewhere there was a life without explosions and loss. These rituals created a strong psychological framework that prevented the individual from falling apart under the pressure of circumstances. They were the only predictable element in an absolutely unpredictable environment. It was this predictability that gave a sense of stability. Soldiers in all armies intuitively understood the importance of such a routine. A break in the routine was often perceived as a bad sign, like a crack in the armor through which fear could seep in. Therefore, even the most seemingly meaningless orders concerning the routine were carried out without question. This adherence to ritual was not a sign of stupidity or military drill. It was a conscious or unconscious choice, a form of psychological self-defense. Routine became the very fortress in which one could take refuge from the madness of war. Everyday tasks became sacred rituals, a talisman against chaos. A soldier did not simply clean his rifle, he exercised his fear. He did not simply shave, he asserted his right to remain human. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the role of such simple, routine actions in extreme situations? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most effective weapon that was not found in any arsenal? This weapon could not be held in your hands, but it saved more soldiers' souls than any field hospital. We are talking about black trench humor. the last line of defense for the human mind. Soldiers joked about things that are not even acceptable to talk about in normal life. Death, injuries, constant danger. All of this became the subject of cynical jokes and puns. This laughter was not out of joy, but out of despair. It was an attempt to devalue the horror, to make it mundane and harmless. By calling their trenches plots of land and enemy snipers, neighbors who like to knock, soldiers tried to tame their fear. They gave scary things funny, everyday names, and this helped them distance themselves from them. Humor created a psychological barrier between consciousness and unbearable reality. This specific folklore was international. American GIs, British Tommies, and Soviet soldiers all created their own dark jokes. This proves that laughter in the face of danger is a universal human reaction, a defense mechanism inherent in our very nature.
All that.
I know, right?
Jokes about one's own death and funeral were especially popular. A soldier might ask a comrade not to forget to take his new boots if he died. This bravado was a way of looking his greatest fear straight in the eye and laughing in its face. Humor was also a way of coping with the absurdity of army life. Ridiculous orders, incompetent officers, and everyday inconveniences were all mocked in scathing ditties and jokes. This allowed soldiers to let off steam and maintain their self-respect. Do you think humor is a universal cure for fear in any situation? In the next chapter, we will talk about how the ordinary desire to get a can of stewed meat turned into an exciting game that pushed thoughts of death out of mind. What I am about to show you was prohibited by the regulations, but encouraged by common sense. There was a special term in the soldier's vocabulary: to organize. It did not mean to steal, but to obtain, to use one's wits and resourcefulness to improve one's life. And this hunt for resources became a powerful means of distraction from fear. The goal of such organizing could be anything: a can of American stew, warm German socks, a few boards to reinforce a dugout, or even a gramophone from an abandoned house. The value of an item was determined not by its cost, but by its usefulness in trench life. Each such acquisition was a small victory. The process was no less important than the result. The hunt required planning, observation, and teamwork. Soldiers were transformed from passive targets awaiting orders into active agents pursuing their own clear goals. It was a real game, with its own rules and excitement. It was necessary to sneak into the warehouse unnoticed, negotiate with the quartermaster, and exchange cigarettes for chocolate from allies. This activity completely absorbed their attention, leaving no room for existential horrors. Successful organization not only raised the level of comfort, but also self-esteem. A soldier who managed to obtain scarce food or materials for his unit became the hero of the day. He was respected for his wit and resourcefulness.
Yes, yes, yes!
This activity created horizontal connections between soldiers. They cooperated to carry out particularly difficult operations and shared information about where and what could be organized. This strengthened the sense of camaraderie and mutual support. Commanders often turned a blind eye to this. They understood that a well-fed and satisfied soldier dressed in warm socks would fight better. In addition, this activity was an excellent way to keep people busy during periods of calm, preventing them from sinking into despondency. Thus, the simple human desire for comfort turned into a complex psychological mechanism. The search for resources became a mission that filled meaningless existence with meaning. The soldier was busy with work and had no time to be afraid. What if I told you that the outcome of many attacks was decided not by officers' orders, but by an old photograph in a pocket or a lucky coin? In a world where logic and common sense no longer worked, soldiers sought support in the irrational. Superstitions and talismans became their personal pocket religion, giving them hope. Every soldier had his own talisman. It could be a photograph of a loved one, a child's toy, the shell casing from his first shot, or just a smooth stone found on the road. This object was the material embodiment of the belief that nothing would happen to him. These talismans had to be kept with them at all times. Before battle, soldiers would always check to make sure their talisman was in place. Touching a familiar object was reassuring, giving them a sense of protection and connection to home. In addition to personal talismans, there were also common soldiers' superstitions. For example, it was considered bad luck to light 3 cigarettes from one match. This superstition originated during the Anglo-Boer War and stated that while the match was burning, a sniper had time to take aim and shoot. There were also rituals for good luck. Some soldiers would always put on their lucky socks before battle, while others would spit over their left shoulder. These actions were meaningless from a logical point of view, but they gave the soldier the feeling that he had done everything possible to save himself. Soldiers believed in signs and omens. The particular cawing of a crow, the shape of clouds, a comrade's random word. Everything could be interpreted as a sign. This belief helped to bring order to chaos and find hidden meaning in random events. Experienced soldiers passed these superstitions on to new recruits. It was part of the process of learning to survive. Young fighters acquired not only practical skills, but also a set of rituals that helped them cope with their first and strongest fear. What signs and rituals do you know that help you cope with anxiety? In the next chapter, we will see how the ability to focus completely on the simplest task helped block out the threatening outside world. One of the most effective ways to combat anxiety was to immerse oneself in a simple but concentration-intensive activity. Soldiers intuitively understood that it was impossible to fear death and brute properly at the same time. The psyche chose one thing, and that one thing was a small, specific task. When shelling began and there was nothing else to do, some soldiers started playing cards or chess. They became completely immersed in the game, calculating their moves and watching their partner. The roar of shells became merely a backdrop to an intellectual duel. Others found solace in crafts. They carved figures out of wood, wove bracelets out of wire, and made lighters out of shell casings. This painstaking work, requiring precision of movement, occupied all their attention and calmed their nerves. Cooking, even the most primitive, became a whole ritual. It was necessary to find fuel for the trench stove, carefully open canned food, and find a way to boil water. The soldier was busy with an important life-sustaining task, and he had no time for fear. This psychological defense mechanism is called tunnel vision. A person focuses so much on one task that all other information, including danger signals, ceases to be perceived. It is a kind of voluntary hypnosis. The ability to enter this state was a vital skill. Experienced soldiers knew that panic was contagious, and the best way to stop it was to keep themselves and others busy. The command, "Keep yourselves busy cleaning your weapons," could be more effective than "Don't panic." Even reading a book or an old newspaper in a trench was not entertainment, but therapy. By immersing himself in a fictional world or news from peaceful life, the soldier temporarily left his terrible reality. He mentally transported himself to a place where it was safe. This method also worked in battle. A sniper who lay in ambush for hours was completely focused on his target. He watched his breathing, the wind, the slightest movement. His brain was busy with complex work, and there was no room for fear. Focusing on a small task allowed him to break the endless, frightening period of waiting into short, understandable segments. Not hold out until morning, but finish cleaning this boot. This approach to the task was much more manageable for the psyche. In essence, it was a way to live in the here and now. Don't think about what happened yesterday, and don't be afraid of what will happen tomorrow. There is only this moment and this simple task that needs to be done well. Want to know the secret that tied a soldier to life more strongly than any rope? That secret was letters. A thin, crumpled piece of paper, covered with familiar handwriting, became a powerful weapon against despair and fear. Receiving mail was the main event in trench life. When the sergeant shouted out the names, there was a ringing silence. Everyone was waiting for news from the world they were fighting for. A world where there was family, love, and simple human life. Reading a letter was a sacred ritual. The soldier would retreat to the farthest corner of the dugout to be alone with his loved ones. He would reread every line dozens of times, trying to catch the intonation, to imagine the face of the writer. These letters were a portal to another reality. Reading about everyday trifles, how his son went to school, or how the neighbors painted their fence, the soldier returned home for a few minutes. It reminded him that he was not just a combat unit, but someone's husband, father, or son. The process of writing a reply was no less important. The soldier carefully chose his words to describe his daily life, without frightening his loved ones. He described his friendships with his comrades, the soldiers' food, the weather, anything but the war. This process forced him to look at his life from a different angle. By describing it to others, he was, in a sense, putting it in order for himself. He looked for bright moments in it to share, and this helped him not to lose heart. The photographs enclosed in the envelope were a priceless treasure. They were carried close to the heart, in the breast pocket of the shirt. In the most terrible moments, the soldier took out the worn card and looked at the faces of his loved ones. This gave him the strength to go on living. The letters were a promise of the future. Each letter received and sent was a step toward the day when the war would end and it would be possible to return home. This correspondence was a thread stretched from the past into the future, through the bloody present. Do you think modern digital messages can replace the magic of a paper letter? In the next chapter, we will talk about how one of the darkest human emotions was used to combat fear. The arsenal of psychological tools for combating fear included one very dark but effective weapon: hatred. The propaganda of all the warring countries deliberately worked to create an image of the enemy, not as a human being, but as a monster that must be destroyed. This hatred sometimes became the fuel that allowed people to overcome their paralyzing terror. Fear is a passive emotion. It immobilizes and forces one to hide. Hatred and anger, on the contrary, are active emotions. They drive one to action. Switching from the "I'm afraid" mode to the "I hate" mode was a way for many soldiers to force themselves to go on the attack. Posters, leaflets, newspaper articles, all of them painted the enemy in the blackest colors. They attributed inhuman cruelty, cunning, and savagery to him. The goal was to dehumanize the enemy in the eyes of the soldier. It is difficult to shoot at a human being. It is much easier to shoot at a caricatured monster on a poster. Propaganda removed moral barriers, transforming the soldier from an ordinary person into the executor of a sacred mission to destroy evil. This hatred was often fueled by personal vendettas. Upon learning of the death of a comrade or receiving news of the suffering of relatives under occupation, soldiers were filled with a thirst for revenge. This thirst was a powerful motivator that supplanted the instinct for self-preservation. Hatred provided a simple and understandable explanation for everything that was happening. It freed soldiers from complex reflections on the causes of the war and their role in it. There is an enemy, and it must be destroyed. This simple formula brought clarity to the chaos. Officers and political instructors actively used this emotion to boost morale. Before an attack, they would give fiery speeches, reminding the troops of the enemy's atrocities. They turned the crowd's fear into rage, channeling it in the right direction. It is important to understand that this hatred was not always sincere. Often it was a mask that soldiers put on to hide their fear. Playing the role of a ruthless avenger, they themselves began to believe in it. For many soldiers, this artificially inflated hatred faded after their first encounter with reality. Seeing the enemy prisoner as a tired and frightened person just like themselves, they understood the lies of propaganda. But on the battlefield, there was no time for reflection. When strength was running out, when it seemed impossible to take another step, song came to the rescue. A simple, uncomplicated soldier's song became that second wind that allowed them to keep going. Its power lay in unity, rhythm, and emotion. The song on the march set the general pace of movement. Picking up the tune, the tired column evened out their steps and their movements became more coordinated and economical. The rhythm of the song was hypnotic, distracting them from the pain in their sore feet and the weight of their equipment. Singing together united people, turning a disparate group into a single organism. Soldiers felt the support of their comrades not only physically, but also emotionally. They were part of a large singing choir, and this gave them strength. The lyrics reflected the life of a soldier. They sang about friendship, home, love, and hatred for the enemy. These simple and understandable words resonated in everyone's soul, allowing them to vent their pent-up emotions. There were bravura and heroic songs that were sung before battle to raise morale. There were lyrical and sad songs that were sung in moments of calm, recalling peaceful life. Song was a universal tool for expressing any feeling. Even in the most difficult conditions, soldiers found time for music, captured harmonicas, guitars, and accordions, could be heard in dugouts and bunkers. Music was an island of normal life in the midst of the hell of war. Songs also had a therapeutic effect. Singing loudly relieved stress and helped to get rid of nervous tension. It was a kind of collective meditation, accessible to everyone. The command encouraged singing, understanding its importance for maintaining morale. Each company had its own lead singers, people with good voices and a large repertoire. They were valued no less than good marksmen. The songs were passed from mouth to mouth, acquiring new verses and variations. They were living soldier folklore, a chronicle of the war written not in headquarters, but in the trenches. They contained more truth than any official report. Music and song were proof that the human spirit cannot be killed. Even surrounded by death and destruction, people continued to create and seek beauty. As long as the song was sung, hope was alive. This power of music was international. Soldiers of all armies sang their songs, and in these songs they were remarkably similar. They sang of homesickness, of the loyalty of friends, and of the dream of living to see victory. For a recruit arriving at the front for the first time, the main source of knowledge about survival was not the regulations or the instructions of officers. His main teacher was the old man, an experienced soldier who had already been through fire and water. This informal institution of mentorship saved thousands of lives and, equally important, soldiers' souls. The veteran taught not only how to dig in properly or how to recognize the sound of enemy mortar fire, he taught the most important thing: how not to go crazy with fear. He shared his experience, his little tricks, and his superstitions. The old man set an example of calmness and composure with his behavior. Watching him smoke a hand-rolled cigarette imperturbably during shelling, the recruit realized that it was possible to get used to it. The veteran's calmness was contagious and worked better than any sedative. Experienced soldiers explained to the young ones that fear was normal. They talked about their first battle, about how their knees were shaking. This simple admission helped the new recruit understand that he was not a coward, that his reaction was natural. Mentorship manifested itself in small ways. A veteran might silently push a mug of hot tea toward a newcomer after a difficult battle. He might silently adjust his equipment, showing him a more comfortable way to carry it. This unwritten code of survival was passed down from generation to generation of soldiers. It included hundreds of rules: where to and where not to light a fire, how to move correctly in open terrain, how to organize your life in a trench. This knowledge was paid for with the bitter experience of others. The old-timers took on the role of informal leaders in the unit. They were listened to not because of their rank, but because of respect for their experience. Often it was their decisions in critical situations that proved to be the most correct. It was a kind of reverse hazing. The veteran did not humiliate the young man, but took care of him, understanding that the life of the entire unit depended on how quickly the newcomer adapted. It was a manifestation of the highest form of military camaraderie. The recruit, in turn, tried to earn the approval of the old-timers. He adopted their manners, their slang, their attitude toward life and death. This was how the initiation took place, transforming a frightened boy into a soldier. It was thanks to this mechanism of passing on experience that armies maintained their combat effectiveness despite enormous losses. New people replaced those who had been lost, and the old-timers molded them into fighters. This continuous chain of mentorship was the backbone of any fighting army. The most important secret weapon that helped soldiers survive was their dream. The dream that someday the war would end and they would return home. This picture of the future, which everyone painted in their imagination, was the light that kept them from sinking completely into darkness. Soldiers constantly talked about what they would do afterwards. These conversations were the most popular entertainment during quiet hours. They were more important than cards and dominoes because they gave hope. Some dreamed of simple, everyday things: sleeping on clean sheets, eating a bowl of hot soup, taking a bath. After the mud and cold of the trenches, these simple joys of peaceful life seemed like the height of bliss. They were an understandable and achievable goal. Others made more ambitious plans: to get married, build a house, get an education, find a good job. These dreams transformed survival from a passive process into a meaningful action aimed at achieving a goal. These conversations about the future were a form of collective psychotherapy. By sharing their dreams, the soldiers supported each other. They seemed to promise each other that they would live to see the day when all this would come true. Dreams were the last refuge where the horrors of war could not reach. Soldiers could mentally transport themselves to their future homes, to their families. These short journeys through time gave their exhausted minds a respite. Many believed that if they could picture their future clearly enough, it would surely come true. This belief in the power of thought, in visualization, was akin to magic. It transformed passive hope into an active tool for shaping reality. This dream of the future was what distinguished a soldier from a mere mortal. He went into battle not to die, but to bring closer the day when he could begin to live. For the sake of this dream, he was willing to endure any hardship. When a soldier lost this dream, when he stopped believing in the after, he broke down. He could continue to fight out of inertia, but his inner core was broken. That is why commanders and comrades tried to keep this spark of hope alive in everyone. This dream was the very meaning that helped them endure the senselessness of war. It was the answer to the main question: why is all this happening? The answer was simple: so that one day it will all end and I will be able to. It was this simple and very human dream of peace, home, and love that was the invisible shield that protected the soldiers' souls. It was stronger than steel armor because it could not be pierced by bullets or shrapnel. It was immortal. We have looked at 10 ways that help soldiers keep their composure under fire. As we can see in this invisible war, the main weapons were not steel and gunpowder, but the strength of the human spirit. Routine, humor, friendship, and dreams. These are what allowed people to remain human in inhuman conditions. The history of World War II is not only a history of battles and strategies. It is, above all, a history of millions of personal victories over one's own fear. And this experience of survival, paid for at an incredible price, is an important lesson for all of us. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Perhaps there are specific historical events or aspects of military life that you would like to learn more about. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.